Hey, you're through the books, boys. You got Dean and PJ on the line. Who's calling?
Hey.
Cool. It's Liam, also known as Secondhand Bookman.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so I just thought I'd ring in about a little known story by Charles Dickens called George Silverman's Explanation. I don't know
oh
if either
wow.
of you two are familiar with it.
Ooh,
No, I
no,
haven't heard of
I,
this.
I I thought I had read, near enough the complete works of Dickens, but I don't know that one. I read all his
Oh wow.
novels. I read any short stories I could find, but I don't know that one.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
All right.
it's
So you've got it. Well, I'd love to hear this. Yeah.
yeah, well,
I've
it's
been
quite interesting. I
defeated.
mean, I had never heard of this story until about 2 weeks ago when I just
Okay.
saw it in a bookshop. And when I put a review up of it online, I also had quite a lot of Dickens fans as well saying that they'd never heard of it either,
Mm.
Wow.
which is really bizarre considering the kind of story itself. I suppose just to kind of give you a bit of history about it, it was published in 1868, so it was about 2 years before Dickens died,
Hmm.
and it was the last complete work of fiction that he wrote. Um,
Oh,
and he was just paid an extraordinary amount of money for this story. I couldn't actually find out how much he was paid for the story itself, but in terms of the publication rights, he was approached by a chap named James Fields, who was the editor at the Atlantic America at the time.
okay.
And he offered Dickens £1,000 for the publishing rights for it to be published in America before England.
Wow, that's a
And
that's a
For
lot back
England,
then.
wow, okay.
yeah, I mean, £1,000 sort of back then in today's money, it works out to about 115 grand.
Wow, just to have it published in America.
And it's a
Great.
really, yeah. I mean, that's literally just the publication right. So I mean, I don't know how much he got paid on top of that either. And it's
Okay.
a really short story. I mean, it comes in at about 44 pages. I actually like looked up the word count.
Wow.
It comes in at 11,000 words. So for the price he was paid just the publication right, it basically worked out to about 2.5 grand per page. He was getting paid for this
Oh my
story,
God.
or about £10 per word.
PJ, if we can get
Yeah,
you
it's
paid
like
that much for Okatama
obscene amounts of money.
Express, you'll be doing quite well.
Yeah, if you can get that for mine up, wow, that's
Prepared,
an insane deal. Wow, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, absolutely ludicrous amount of money. And it's such an incredible story. I mean, which is why it kind of just baffles me that it
Mm,
just seems to fly under the radar. So many sort of Dickens fans, I
Mm.
suppose, because not only is it a brilliant story, it's the last piece of fiction that he completed, and he was just paid an obscene amount of money for it.
wow.
But really short story, as I said, 44 pages. I mean, I don't know how kind of in depth you want me to go with the story in terms of like spoilers. I mean, do you want me to just kind of completely unpack
Our
it?
general rule is never spoil the ending, but you can kind of, talk
Yeah,
about
and
the
I'd
first
love to
kind
hear
of
about this.
half to two thirds.
And I'd love to hear about the story. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's fascinating.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll keep the ending under wraps then.
Please.
I mean, it starts off. I mean, immediately it just feels really familiar as a Dickens story. It
Okay.
opens up with George Silverman himself as a child living in this kind of squalid, damp cellar in Preston. Really unhappy childhood, and ends up being
Wow.
orphaned. So immediately there's that kind of
Okay,
classic
it's hitting all
Dickens
the
trope
tropes
of
right away.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Stereotypical
pr-
Dickens.
pretty much. And he kind of leads this kind of really miserable life, even when his parents are alive. That they treat him really harshly. He keeps being accused of his mother of being sort of too worldly and wanting too many things, even when he's just asking for food and warmth. So he's living in this kind of I mean, it's horrific. He's kind of existing in this sort of like purely kind of animalistic state, I suppose. And his parents both end up dying of fever, and he gets rescued from the cellar, a clergyman who has a fantastic name, Verity Hawkyard. And again, there's quite a few names in the story, like typical Dickens, just really
Yeah,
fantastic names.
Yeah.
So he's kind of rescued by this clergyman and is sort of educated and sort of brought up in this quite religious environment, and really doesn't like it. And sort of throughout the story, he's basically living with this really sort of ingrained sense of and shame, really, due to kind of just being locked up most of his life and just thought the way his parents treated him. He just has almost no self-esteem. He just looks down on himself and just considers himself, like the worst person in the world. the kind of children who's kind of brought up with. They sort of invite him to parties and he turns them down because he just doesn't feel like he's good enough, and he just really just sort of like isolates himself and just sort of sabotages his kind of chance at happiness, really. Like every time that sort of option comes along, he just blows it out of the water, really.
Okay, so he's slightly different than it sounded like the orphan story. It's the same as Oliver Twist, it's the same as Great Expectations, David Copperfield, but actually most of them, they're looking for a happy ending. It sounds like maybe this guy's not really even looking for a happy ending.
Yeah, pretty much. He's kind of just completely alone as well. I mean, there's no sort of Joe Gargery figure like you get in Great Expectations. Someone to kind of like really sort of coddle him and bring him up. So he's just kind of dealing with all the stuff himself. Eventually becomes an adult and sort of goes off to university or college to get educated. And continues to kind of carry this guilt around with him until he's approached by quite a wealthy woman and she wants him to educate her daughter. And he falls in love with the daughter. She falls in love with him as well. And
mercy,
I won't kind of say what happens at the end, but it is quite a sort of sad story. It is sort of missing that kind of classic sort of like typical kind of happy ending.
Yes,
that you
standard Dickens ending
is absent.
Oh no! So because in most Dickens novels, just no matter how sad it gets, they all get married and live happily ever after in the end. So it's a shame if we don't get that, actually.
It sounds very existentialist and modernist. Actually, it doesn't sound like a Dickens novel. It sounds like something, I don't know, like Gorski would write or something like that, or Dostoevsky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's bizarre because the sort of story exists in sort of two camps, where like on the one hand it really does feel like really familiar as a Dickens story. You kind of got those classic tropes. You've got the kind of fantastic names and things like that. But then on the other hand, it doesn't have that happy ending. One of the most notable things that's missing from it is humor. It's not particularly funny, which is quite strange.
So
I think Dickens lost his humor near the end. I think his last couple of works, they don't have that humor of his early stuff. It's quite sad, actually.
It is such a shame. I mean, I did manage to kind of track down a quote by Dickens when he went back and read this kind of short story, and he said himself that it feels like someone else had written it, like it's fallen out of someone else's head.
Really?
So it's kind of bizarre. It's sort of really kind of Dickensian on one hand, but it's also kind of missing a lot of the kind of typical things that you'd expect to find in a Dickens story.
I have just one question for you because of its length. Does it read like a real short story, or does it read like a plan for a novel? Is it what he could have turned into a full novel, or is it very clear that it was always just going to be a short story?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I really wish it was a novel. As I said, it's about 44 pages long, and I just sort of wish it was about 444. There's kind of so much potential. There's basically just so much potential in there to kind of explore the character, and a lot of kind of stuff in his life does get skipped over quite quickly. But I mean, it still does feel like a short story. It is still enjoyable. It's kind of very tight. There's not a kind of like wasted word or a syllable in it.
Well, hey, if I was getting paid $2,000 per page, I would not be wasting any words.
Well, this is the sort of common criticism you find. When people talk about Dickens, they always say he was paid by the word, so he just stretched everything out and everything becomes sort of so flowery, which I've never agreed with personally. I just never thought that, Great Expectations could have benefited from, taking a single word out of that novel. It's just
some of them could though. You could cut a little bit out of Bleak House. I think that's that doesn't need to be 800 pages and very little happens in it. That could be cut a little bit.
Well, our joke is
that's fair enough. I'll tell you that.
Our joke is that he took the Anna Karenina method, which was a best-selling method to make big, huge novels. To have like a short story, and then you just put an agricultural manual around it. So I think that he was kind of going for that Tolstoy method.
So if it feels like Anna Karenina gets a mention in every one of your episodes about it.
I just had to mention it. It was on my agenda to mention it. So.
Man, thanks so much for calling in. Let's plug your Instagram. It's Secondhand Bookman. And you're doing book reviews on there?
Yeah, at Secondhand Bookman. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, Secondhand Bookman, all just sort of one word, all lowercase.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thanks
And I love your mission. So it seems like you're going, like, what I get from that, but you can correct me though. What I get from that is that you go to secondhand bookshops, or you search for books that are unknown and then bring them back to life. Can we say? Is that what you do?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite similar to Dean in the sense that 99% of my book shopping is done in secondhand bookshops.
With us too. Like, we love that. So
we love that. Yeah.
It's great.
Secondhand bookshops are just these kind of these magical.
Actually, my confession is that the bookshop that I always talk about going to, like, PJ introduced me to that shop. I didn't even know that shop before, so that's PJ's gift to me, actually.
There you go, the magic bookshop we call it. Yeah.
Well,
next time you're in Belfast,
next time you're in
Belfast, we'll meet up and go there and excavate.
Awesome.
Take your shovel.
Yeah, no, that sounds absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, man.
Brilliant.
Awesome, dude.